this weekend continues the 136th Scottish Cup. So we thought, given the entry some of the biggest teams, it would be a good time to have a look at the competition, where we think it's going. And a way that we thought of doing that was reviewing some of the biggest cup shocks that have happened within our lifetime. So what we're going to do is we're each going to propose one or two, and then we'll try and rank them and see if we as a group can decide whether or not, or which cup shocks we think are the biggest giant killings in history. And then we'll have a little look towards the games this weekend and pick out any potential upsets. So I thought I'd get the ball rolling with one of my own, which is probably, for a lot of the listeners, this will be one of the most famous ones because it generated one of the most famous headlines. But I've gone for Inverness Caley Thistle's 3-1 win over Celtic in 2000. And the reason I picked that one was purely because of the famous newspaper headline, Super Caley Go Ballistic, Celtic are atrocious, which probably sums up the game perfectly. So a little bit of background. It was part-time Highland Minnows Inverness stunned Parkhead with a memorable Scottish Cup win. They'd only been in existence for 6 years and never gotten past the third round. And it was voted the greatest shock in Scottish Cup history by BBC viewers. So have any of you guys come across the game before?
I can't say prior to you lads mentioning it and me coming across it in the during the research that I actually remembered the game. But obviously that headline, it's quite a memorable one. I mean, I wasn't actually watching football at that point, but even I remember the headline. And as you say, obviously only being Caley Thistle's 6th season in existence, I mean, it's a pretty incredible result. I know the manager, he was saying that he thought that had marked the point that Inverness had arrived, and I think he's probably fair enough to say that. I think what we rightfully, obviously, recognise the Inverness side of things, it is also worth pointing out on the Celtic Celtic side of things, it's actually cost John Barnes' job. There was a lot of fanfare in that about his appointment, and folk were very positive he was there, but then that result just killed all of it, and he was gone the next day.
Yeah, I think when you look at I know that in the aftermath that Barnes blamed not having the likes of Lambert, but some of the names of the players that were playing were Tommy Boyd, Reggie Blinker, Lubo Moravcik, Mark Viduka, Ian Wright. So with that quality, and especially Viduka and Wright up top, I think Wright came off the bench at halftime. They should have been putting a team like Inverness in like it was pre-Martin O'Neill era Celtic. It was still a very good side. It wasn't, I know Celtic in the 90s had a couple of big cup upsets and had kind of gone through the quagmire financially as well, but they were, by this point, they'd won a league title again and they were very much on the ascendancy. So I think it was definitely, obviously it was a shock in regards of the size of the opposition, but also in terms of the fact that Celtic were on the way back up to their sort of true position. Scott, what did you make of, how would you rate it as a famous shock?
Yeah, it's definitely up there, as you say. You saying that it's most famous, as you say, from the headline, because I think if anybody talks to you about that game, they go, "Oh, that's that Super Caley Thistle Celtic are atrocious headline." And I mean, as you say, you've listed all the players that played that day for Celtic. Inverness probably couldn't believe their luck, and just you seen them. But this is what I always say: FA Cup, Scottish Cup. This is what they're for. It's for days like this where a smaller club goes to a massive club like Celtic and gets a great result, and it just the history of cup competitions makes smaller people that love smaller clubs love the competition. And so talking about Celtic and big cup upsets brings me on to the game that I find synonymous to the competition was, especially in my lifetime, is Clyde 2, Celtic 1 back in 2006, which was known as Roy Keane's debut for Celtic. And clearly it wasn't a good one, going by the scoreline, but it was a game that just Celtic did not turn up that day. I think Clyde had 2 goals chopped off before they even got one to stand, but so Celtic could have easily been 4-0 down at half time and nobody could have complained. So yeah, it was quite the game, and it was also a debut for Du Wei, who was a Chinese defender, and he was taken off at half time, and that was the last time Celtic fans ever seen him. So I think that summed up
tells you all you need to know.
day. Have you guys got any recollections of that game?
This is another game on the list that I'd only kind of just got into football. I can't say I particularly remember. Most of my notes are just basically what you've already said, Scott. I think the only other thing to add is is that you're talking about it being Roy Keane's debut. Some of the things that I was reading, apparently Strachan wasn't convinced by the signing of Keane, so I don't know if that was like a board decision to sign him or something. And I mean, if you want to make a good first impression, this definitely isn't the way to do it.
No. Ali?
I think the Keane thing's even more interesting. It's an appropriate time to look back on this particular game, given that Roy Keane is one of the front runners for the Celtic job at the moment.
Yeah.
So if his debute's anything to go by, I think I'd be running away from the job.
Celtic fan, just don't watch his first game in charge. Thereafter you're fine, but yeah, just avoid that first one.
I actually remember watching the game when I was younger. I think it's a nice story for Clyde because I think that was kind of around the time that Clyde had started to descend as they have done. You know, the Bully Wee aren't really the team that they used to be. They kind of underachieve a little bit in the Scottish League, certainly in modern times. So I like the story of it. I remember reading when we were looking up stuff for this that apparently Clyde usually line up on one side of the tunnel, and the TD cameras wanted Celtic to line up on that side of the tunnel so that they could get the perfect kind of shot of Roy Keane as he led the Celtic team out, and the Clyde side refused to line up and just roll out. Like they refused to just let that happen for the bigger team, basically. And I don't know, it just when I from what I remember from the game and from watching the highlights, like Clyde just got on their faces, and basically it was a proper, like, they knew that they couldn't beat them at football, although they did play well that day, but they kind of just kicked them about the park. And I thought that sets the tone pretty well for it. So it's a massive killing, like giant killing. It definitely, like Scott says, I think anybody of our age, if you ask them what one of their biggest cup shocks is, it's definitely Clyde beating Celtic, and the whole Roy Keane thing adds like another narrative to it.
Yeah. No, definitely. And as I say, like, think of the names that were in that Celtic team. Again, we're going back to like the names that would be playing. Yeah, what was it? Nakamura, Neil Lennon, beside Roy Keane in midfield.
John Maloney.
Boric in goals, Maloney, John Hartson. It was just internationals. And they couldn't go to Broadwood and get a result against Clyde, who, by the way, their average age was 20 of the squad.
I was just taking a complete tangent with me reading the report, and I mentioned to the guys before, but reading the Clyde report back in the day from 2006, it's a very animated report, and they were giving pelters to the referee, and it's interesting to see such a shift and change of how reports are portrayed, because you don't get it as often these days. They don't tend to slate the referees as bad in news reports and stuff, but back then and went. So it's quite an interesting read.
And the next game we turn our attention to, and it's actually the most recent entry on the list, just from a couple of weeks ago, in fact. Another game I don't remember. No, only joking. It was the game Brora against Hearts in the second round of the Scottish Cup, and it finished unbelievably 2-1 to Brora. And I think the thing that I was reading online, and for me that sets us maybe apart from all the other great shocks we've been talking about, is the fact that Brora hadn't played since January the 11th. Like, the games like Inverness and that, don't get me wrong, they were incredible, but the teams had actually been playing and training. I think Brora had maybe trained 3 times, had a couple of friendlies. So to go out there and, from the match reports I've read, pretty much, take the game to Hearts, play very well. I think there was a spell before Brora got their first and maybe started the second half. But apart from that, Brora were on top and thoroughly deserved the win. In response to the loss, Robbie Nielsen, the Hearts manager, called it an embarrassment, which, I mean, for him to say of his team, I think is pretty telling.
That's what
I think the Edinburgh Evening News described it as the worst result in Hearts history, and I'm sure I read it. Someone else you might have this fact checked, but I think that it was the first time Hearts had lost to non-league opposition in over 100 years. So that tells you the magnitude of the result. Like,
I think something else to like further put this into context is just how crazy, how monumental it was. Like, Hearts were the finalists the past 2 years. Yeah. So for them to go out in the second round to like, I mean, this is the only argument I've kind of seen against things, is that Brora, obviously, now we know for all intents and purposes will be going up. So it's only like 2 divisions between them, but it was at the time it was like 3. So yeah, it's a pretty incredible resulting story, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean, bro, club stature wise, Hearts are probably arguably the 3rd biggest club in Scotland, and yes, they're in the Championship right now, but they're, as I say, they're one of the biggest clubs in Scotland, so it just magnifies that purpose of them losing that game. And Robbie Nielsen's right to call it an embarrassment, because I think everybody in the whole of Scotland was just laughing all night going, this can't be right. They've got this the wrong way around. It's just, but I mean, as you said, Ryan, I watched the highlights and Brora deserved their win. They were the better team, and Hearts just struggled to string 2 passes together all night. But yeah, even though they were missing, I think they missed Craig Gordon, and there was one other missing, Michael Smith, who were on international duty. Liam Boyce was up on the bench, and you had, I think it's Nandale, Mackay, Stephen were all playing. If they can't beat Brora, they might as well just not play. Like, it was just unbelievable.
I think also that this game was kind of Hearts season in a microcosm. Obviously, it was the lowest of low points. But obviously, there's been ever-growing frustration, like with the fan base, with the board, with Nielsen, and more so with Anne Budge and Craig Levine. You know, for the style of football they've played, they feel like they're taking their club away, kind of thing. So it's obviously just further fueled that kind of breakdown in relations.
So talking of junior sides beating the big boys, another shock that I would like to propose is Auchinleck Talbot beating Ayr in 2019. So this one stood out particularly for me, given it was a junior side. Very good junior side, it must be said, who at the time were unbeaten in 13 games, coming up against an Ayr side who were winless in 5. So we're talking about meeting somebody in their best form, probably Talbot's best opportunity, and obviously they took it. I think the most notable thing for this, for me, was Talbot in their Hull City kit. They only scored with 1 shot on target. So that was Craig McCracken, who was a law student, maybe is still a law student, maybe became a lawyer. Well done, Craig. But he scored the only goal in that game with 1 shot on target. So that was very much a FIFA game, actually, because I'm sure Ayr had 21 shots on target or something ridiculous. And yeah, so Talbot scored only 1. Again, talking about managers blaming injured players, so they were missing Shankland at the time. And again, it was mentioned the fact that there would have been a different game had he been playing. Not sure you can say that about one player, but yep, that's my proposal for a shock. So interested to get the views on that one.
It's interesting. I didn't see the thing about Ayr having 21 shots, Andrew. The match report that I read, apparently, like, it was no fluke. Talbot thoroughly deserved it. Ayr were just very poor, as you were saying. They came into the game on poor form. I guess what makes it even more ironic is the fact that the lad McCracken who scored apparently used to be at Ayr. So that always further, like, I guess, hurt. Yeah. And I guess my one final point is, when I traditionally think about a cup shock, you think about a team being like penned in their own half for like 89 minutes, and then they just get like that one chance. This slightly more falls into this category than probably the other games we've been talking about, because I think it's fair to say that Cali Thistle and certainly Brora were probably the better teams in those games, despite being the weird clubs. So obviously this is a bit more return to what you kind of traditionally like associate as a cup shock.
For me, the big thing is just it's the size of the club. I mean, like I know Ayr aren't a Premier League club, so when you think of a giant killing, like pretty much the rest of the ones we have are all SPL clubs or clubs that should be in the SPL. But like for a junior team to beat any professional team is a massive, massive achievement.
Yeah, it's one of those games that you admire because it's a junior side. It's a side from the junior leagues, and personally, I've always enjoyed junior football, particularly because I referee in it. But junior football has it's got a certain type of watch to it, and when you're seeing those sort of teams enter the Scottish Cup and then, progress in it, it says a lot about the junior game and the quality that lies down there. So it's always good. I always like enjoying, or I enjoy seeing the wee sides and the junior.
Yeah, and it's the beauty of the Scottish Cup as a competition, in that it's not restricted to just the professional leagues. It's that any team of any size from any level of football can go all the way. Absolutely. And I think Auchinleck got to the last 16 where they were eventually beaten by Hearts. But I mean, that's it. They got the big win and then they get the glamour tie. That's what it's all about, isn't it? The big away day for the Auchinleck fans and stuff.
Made a lot of money as well with the camera appearances, obviously. But they made a lot of money from that. But for a junior side, is obviously very well sorted.
One thing that I wanted to bring up for this game when we had proposed this one was the fact, and Ryan's already mentioned it anyway, or one of his mentioned about the goal scorer being that he came through Ayr. Well, I'm pretty sure I'd read something like half of the starting 11 for Auchinleck had came through the Ayr youth system. So it's almost a way of them trying to prove, look, we were good enough to play at that level. So it's them proving them wrong. And they managed to get the result. And Ayr had 20 shots, did you say?
So there's 21 shots in target.
But I remember watching the game live, and I always thought that Ayr weren't really that. It wasn't quality chances. It was always just sort of shoot just to get a shot away and crosses flying over people's heads. And Auchinleck were fairly comfortable, even though they only had one or two shots themselves. But they never looked in a lot of danger. I think they had one chance there that they probably should have scored from. I think it was Michael Moffat. But other than that, it was a comfortable enough 1-0, even though it might statistics-wise say that Ayr dominated the game.
Okay, so that kind of brings us round to our last game. And the reason that I kind of kept this one for last is because to me it seems, or I'm going to pitch it as just the quintessential Scottish Cup shot. And it just happened within our lifetimes, apart from Fleming, in 1995, and that was Stenhousemuir 2, Aberdeen 0. So it was just a kind of game that had everything. Aberdeen were in good form, just beating Rangers. They were sitting, I think, second in the SPL or something at the time. And then they go to Stenhousemuir in the bottom tier of the professional setup. Oakle View, pitch is an absolute turf. It's just, and then Aberdeen walk in, great form, and they get played off the park 2-0 by a bunch of part-timers. And I thought, just a couple of bits and pieces was the Tommy Steele, who scored the first goal for Stenhousemuir, was a dairy farmer at the time, which probably suited the pitch. He had home field advantage. Remarkably, Craig Brown, the Scotland manager at the time, joked in an interview that Stenhousemuir were going to win, and they did. And the quote that I really liked was from Billy Dodds, who played in that game for Aberdeen, where he said, the changing room was tiny, the pitch was like a quagmire, we had so many negative thoughts right away, and we just got beaten before we even set foot on the pitch. And I just thought that was like the perfect kind of Scottish Cup setting of a big team in form, goals, crappy dressing room, crappy pitch, and they get beat.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. It's the thing that it was brought up earlier in the podcast, that it's just typical cup competitions where you get the little club from the lowest league playing a team from the Premier League, especially at home, because then they can use that to their advantage. And this was another example of that. And as you say, Aberdeen are used to a changing room where they've probably all got a bit of space between each other. This one, they're all crammed in, us 15, 16 of them. And they've probably got maybe one shower, and it's probably freezing. It's just everything Steny will have made it as tough as possible. And as you say, the pitches back then weren't great, but I'm sure Steny's wouldn't have been the best anyway at that time. So, yeah, it all just lined up. And I had also read that Craig Brown had joked that Steny were going to win that. And I think they went on, did they not go to play Hibs in the next round? So it was another big tie for them to look forward to as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think this game really stands out in the list for me because it's one game I actually remember. I was about 2 months old, but I remember it like it was yesterday.
No, it's a
I'm joking. I think like something that really sets this one apart from the other shocks we've discussed is the fact that as recently as sort of 10 years prior under Fergie, Aberdeen had won a European Cup. And then I was reading apparently 1991, onwards, they were in a bit of a decline. But then this was obviously probably a really low point because, in fact, I know Alistair was saying they were sitting second at that time. That season, after losing to Stenhousemuir, they seemed to go into free fall and they actually got relegated. So for a team, I guess you could probably liken it a bit to Leeds in England, a team that's like been in European competition to get relegated when like 10 years, it's quite a story. And as the lads have touched on, obviously, Tommy Steele, a dairy farmer, getting one over Aberdeen. I'm sure there's a punchline in there. I'll leave that to you at home.
I just fact checked myself. They were second bottom, not second in the league. So
okay, that makes a bit more sense. I was like, Jesus, they must have really been in free fall to get relegated. Yeah.
No, but they had just beaten
Rangers. Yeah. The one other thing I just want to quickly add, sorry, before I'll pass to Andrew if he's got any thoughts, is the quote I really liked is I was reading that the Aberdeen players were sitting obviously in the change room after the game, and the manager, is it Roy Aitken?
Yeah, Roy Aitken.
Yeah. He like pops his head round the door and he's like, "Congratulations, lads, on being part of the worst result in this team's history." Like, I think that says it all.
Literally after you said, I was about to go and bring that up, was that apparently it was, I think it was Duncan Shearer that mentioned it in a press article saying that Roy Aitken had waited a good like 5 to 10 minutes just to probably calm down, but to then just turn around and say, "Yep, congratulations on being a part of the worst result ever for the club."
I think it was obviously such a shock to the players too, because I remember in the same article that the Billy Dodds quote that I read out, he said that like there was he was playing against one of the like years later he was playing in another cup game, and then like he was getting wound up by the opposition defender who was reminding him that he once got beat 2-0 by Stenhousemuir at Oakleview. So he said they never let him live it down.
Jeez.
I've nothing else to add. All I would say is that when I was reading about this game, it reminds me quite heavily of kind of a Sunday league morning match where you're turning up and the pitch is an absolute disgrace and you should really call it off. But the thought of grown men flying about in mud just appeases you too much, so you can keep the game going. And I've been in changing rooms like that where it's, like a cupboard.
That's the kind of 5 ones that we've picked out. What I did was I also compiled a list of honourable mentions that I'll run through. Obviously, the ones that we picked were within our lifetimes, quote unquote, and I'm sure some of our older audience can think of a few that might be on this list. So the ones that I've picked out were Albion Rovers 1, Motherwell 0 in 2013. I've got Ross County beating Celtic 2-0 in the semi-final in 2010. Berwick 1, Rangers 0 in 1967, and I know for a lot of the older generation, and also I think it was second on the BBC poll that I referred to, but it is often considered as the biggest shock in Scottish Cup history. There's Hamilton 1, Rangers 0 from 1987, East Fife 2-0 win against Hibs in 1984, and Forfar beating Hearts 1-0 in 1982. So some people may or may not recognise those, and if there are any others that we've missed that you can think of, please drop a comment down below and let us know which of the ones we've mentioned that might have particularly stood out to you. So just to kind of try and get an idea of the gravity of each, Fleming, I asked you to rank your, out of the 5 we mentioned, your biggest to less big shock. How did you rank those 5 that we've come up with?
It was, I don't know, I was struggling because they've all got their own thing about it. Like, each shock has got something different about it, and it's different generations as well, between like the Brora one to the Stenny one. So I kind of struggled with it. But if I was to go, I mean, they're all big shocks anyway, but if I was to go from 5 to 1, I would probably say that 5th would be Auchinleck against Ayr. And then 4th, I'd have Stenny, Aberdeen. 3rd, I had Clyde against Celtic. 2nd, I had Celtic against Inverness. And it's the most recent one, but I genuinely think it probably is the biggest one. It was Brora beating Hearts. Just the fact that, I mean, Liam Boyce was playing for Hearts, and his wage was like alone. Somebody had said like Brora would have had to pay their players 3 times as much to get to Boyce's wage. It's incredible.
I had Clyde Celtic as my number 1. I kind of went on. I definitely take on board what Scott was saying with Brora not having played and stuff, but I've gone for the fact that Celtic side won the title with 90 points and walked the league, and were beaten by that Clyde side. Plus, you throw in the narrative of it being Roy Keane's first game. I think it just has everything and more, and it's the biggest giant killing in terms of like a giant killing, because that was a title-winning Celtic side.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
No, that's I didn't really think about it like that, Alistair. That's a really fair point. I think for me personally, I did agree with Scott's list. I certainly think that the Celtic Cali Thistle game and the Brora Hearts one, they're definitely top 2. You can argue about which way round.
I would go along with Alistair, but I would only flip my top 2. So I'd have the Clyde game first and then Brora, purely on the basis of the 91 points. And just given Hearts' recent form lately, yes, it was a shock, but in the context of it, it kind of made sense given what Hearts was doing. So
that's exactly why I had that second and the other one first. Yeah,
only flip them round, but I think they're all very good calls for shocks. I think, given the long list that we could have chosen from, I think we came up with a very good 5. So, aye.
Looking ahead to this weekend, just as we finish up, are there any fixtures that stand out to you guys for a potential shock? Just to throw one out there myself, Dumbarton Aberdeen is one that I'm going to be watching, only because Aberdeen can't score for shit. And I know Dumbarton aren't the best team, they haven't played for a long time, but 26 years ago, Stenny were the exact same. They went in great ways, and it was on their home pitch. So I think if I was an Aberdeen fan, I'd be a wee bit, and I know they are because I've asked one, they're worried about history repeating itself.
Yeah, that's a good shout.
Yeah, oh, and you go, sorry, Andrew.
Yeah, for me, probably slightly biased here, but I actually do believe there could be a wee upset in the Wraith Livingston game, purely going by form. We've just beat our local rivals 5-1. So if we're not going into that game full of confidence, I don't know what would make us. So I'm not necessarily going to win the game, but I wouldn't be surprised with a draw. And then obviously it's a coin flip with penalties. So that for me could be a shock. It's a good game to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
I mean, I try to look at the fixtures objectively, but I still think I had my kind of romantic hat on a bit, because most of the shocks I've picked out involve teams we've talked about. So I had the Dumbarton Aberdeen game for the reasons Alistair said, like history repeating itself. And by the same token, I've also went for Stenhouse Muir because I fancy them to get a 1 or 2-0 win over Killie. And again, just history repeating itself.
I had them down too as well, Ryan.
I wouldn't class it as a shock or a giant killing per se, but I could definitely see Brora getting past Stranraer. And then the last one that I saw, I think this really would be the ultimate giant killing for me, is for some reason is it four man time against Motherwell?
For
It just
Martin.
screams 1-0, and I don't know why, but it just screams 1-0.
They're Highland League as well, aren't they? Former time.
Yeah. No, for Martin, Motherwell was one that I looked at. I went, just for headlines and just for the cup, I do hope for Martin do it, but I just think Motherwell are going to have too much of them. I mean, they only just scraped past Annan in the last round for Martin, so it'll be tough for them to then jump up against a team that's 3 leagues above Annan to pull out. But the cup's there for upset, so why not? I do agree with Alistair. It'll be interesting to see how Aberdeen get on, considering they've not been able to score a goal for, 9 games? So even though it's only Dumbarton might look at that as a positive and go, well, why should it be any different against us?
It's either 2-0 Dumbarton or 6-1 Aberdeen.
Aye.
Okay, so if you've enjoyed today's video, then like I said, remember to drop us a like, subscribe if you haven't already subscribed, and leave a comment. What was your biggest shock that you've seen in Scottish Cup history, and do you anticipate there being any shocks? Otherwise, we'll see you next week.